Okay, we left off Chesed and Aleph. Chesed and Aleph, the last third of the page. Rameir says in the Mishnah, although the Tanakh says if you bring a get from Aku, which is Chutz Loretz, in Teretz Yisrael, one has to say Poni Nechtam, it's the equivalent of bringing it from overseas. Rameir says no, Aku Keretz Yisrael Gittin. Aku, although it is Chutz Loretz, but in regard to Gittin, we treat it as if it's being brought in Eretz Yisrael, and the Shliach who delivers the get does not say Poni Nechtam. So what is the reason? Because it's close enough that the people are proficient in Lishma, and if you have to authenticate it, you'll be able to locate the people who recognize the signatures. Because the Shayoros, you have caravans, people traveling back and forth, you'll be able to have someone who recognizes the signatures. Boy minei Rabchi barabo. Hamoch avdo l'suryo. Now, the Gemara says later, not in this pair, much later. Now, an Eved Kanani slave. Although he's not a Jew, but nevertheless, his obligation as a human being is no less than a woman's obligation. He's chab mitzvahs kisha. Mitzvahs shishman groma, he's exempt, but any other mitzvah he has to keep, no less than a woman. So if you sell a slave to Chutz Loretz, so the mitzvahs that he's able to keep in Eretz Yisrael, he's not able to keep, so you're denying him, you're denying the slave opportunity to perform mitzvahs. So the person who purchases the slave, we penalize him, and we say he's emancipated immediately. He does not retain his slave status, but rather we emancipate him. He's freed. Hamocha avdol le'chutz loretz, he's what? He's free. You can't sell. Rabbinically, he's penalized. Okay, so the question is, Hamocha avdol le'suryo. Kemocha b'chutz loretz. So suryo, the Gemara will discuss it now. Now, what is even the consideration? So it's Syria. You know, you have the Aleppo community. Syria is, we're talking Aram Sova. That's Syria. Syria. We're not talking about Damascus. We're not talking about Damascus. Syria. We're talking about Aram Sova, because the Gemara will say David conquered Aram Sova. Aram Naraim and Aram Sova, David, that was his personal conquest. The Gemara will have a question. Because of his personal conquest, did it assume the status of Eretz Yisrael? Or does it still remain Chutz Loretz? What exactly, how's it classified? If it's Eretz Yisrael, so you haven't sold them outside of Eretz Yisrael, so that's the question. Hamocha avdol l'suryo, kemocha b'chutz loretz. Do we see it no differently? He sold them to a location which there's less mitzvahs there, therefore we penalize the buyer, and therefore the slave is emancipated. O dilma, no, maybe we don't. Because maybe kibush yochid shmei kibush, which is not so simple, we'll see. And therefore, he's not freed. Amaluhu. So this was Reb Chia bar Abba's question he posed. Amalu tinusua. We learned in the Brisa, in the Tosefta. Remeir Omer Aku Kertzel Legitin. We learned in the Mishnah. He says Aku is Ertzel Legitin. What's the inference? He said the inference is Gitin Ein Lavodim Lo. We only treat it as Ertzel for Gitin, but in terms of what it is, it's Chutz Loretz. So if it's Chutz Loretz, it's Yotze L'Cherus, so therefore he's emancipated. So if that's Aku, Koshkim Suryo Demerch Ketuva, so Aku, which is closer, for getting yes, and for what? For selling not, it's Chutz Loretz. So Surya, which is even beyond that, Lo Koshkim, it's what? We definitely penalize him. I mean, seemingly it's a little difficult. It's difficult. I mean, we have to make a Koshkim. Aku, which is closer, he says legitin and not for selling a slave. Now, why do we penalize him? Because Aku is Chutz Loretz. So what do we need inference? What do we need inference? What determines whether you have to say it or not? Could you locate witnesses to identify this, to authenticate the signatures? That's the discussion. So Rameir says it's close enough that you're able to. But the other discussion is a whole different discussion. Whether you're Bekin Lishma, whether you're able to locate the witnesses or not. It's unrelated to discussion. Factually, if you're not Chayv b'mitzvahs in Chutz Loretz, as Eretz Yisrael, he's emancipated. He's penalized. There's a base to penalize him. So what do we have to make a koshke? Surya, Aku, so definitely Surya, which is even beyond that. We've established a principle. The principle is what? If it's not Eretz Yisrael, we penalize.
So the question is, what is Eretz Yisrael?
Yes, then it's not a koskim any longer. Aku.
Exactly.
So then the whole thing. So what are you drawing? You're drawing an analogy from Aku. Aku, which is close, is not it. So Surya is definitely. What do you mean? Surya may be kibush yochid. I mean, if David conquered it, maybe it has the same status as Eretz Yisrael.
Why should I think I can compare Avodim to Git? Because it's about the land. You're talking about Kedushin.
So you have to say, what you have to say, you see from the Gemara, 1 second, you have to say, it's not only because it's Chutz Loretz. Let's say it's Eretz Yisrael. Kibush yochid shmei kibush. But let's say in Chutz Loretz, they're less observant there. So you're putting the slave in a setting, in an environment, which is less conducive to mitzvahs. He's not going to be able to maintain himself. An ordinary Jew, because he's a Jew, he maintains himself, despite his environment. Not that even if it's not conducive. But a slave, if you put him in an environment which is not conducive, so that's what we're saying. You see, they're B'ki Lishma. They're Jews there. But factually, because it's Chutz Loretz, it's not as conducive as Eretz Yisrael. So if Aku, which is closer, we say forgetting yes and what, and it's Lishma, and the Jews there. Of course, you're able to authenticate the signatures, and there's this intermingling of Erzo and with Aku. So Suri, which is beyond, it's endlessly further than that. There's no question we're going to penalize him. That it's not conducive. I'm not sure what Bavel is. Bavel, maybe yes, maybe not. 100%, 100%. He shouldn't take the slave. Yeah. No, there's nothing to do with it. What is Eskanani?
Who is going to buy a slave?
That's
if
it.
There's this question.
No, that nobody will buy him. Exactly.
There's no market value for
has
a
no
slave.
correct, because the moment he's sold, immediately he's emancipated.
He doesn't need a document.
Well, the Bezdin will write him a document. It probably has to do with Hefker, Bezdin, Hefker. The court will actually write a document, and they'll free him. They will free him.
But let's suppose this man sells his slave to someone outside, and the slave runs away under this Gemara.
He's not doing anything wrong.
He's not doing anything wrong.
Correct. The sale is not a valid sale. Rashi says we penalize the buyer. If there's no buyer, there's no seller. So because the buyer is willing to buy, the seller is willing to sell. Rashi says the katzin lokeach. We penalize the purchaser, not the seller.
So there is no buyer.
There is no buyer, exactly.
And what about a Gentile? How does that work?
What do you mean Gentile?
A Gentile buys a slave.
A Gentile can't buy an Evet Kanani. You're not permitted to sell it.
That's not.
You're not permitted to sell a Canaanite slave to. It's like selling a Jew to a Gentile.
So that already is
Right.
locked.
It's not worried. It's inferring from that statement. It's inferring. No, it's inferring. It says legitin. What does it say legitin? Rameir could have said in the Mishnah. Tanakam says chutz loretz. You have to say regardless. Rameir says aku. You don't have to say. No, Rameir says legitin. What does he have to add the word legitin? It's kersel legitin. It's evidently legitin, but not for other things.
In other words, it's a very strange. I want to impose something, but then it doesn't bring any fruit either way.
I understand. Since Rameh used the term legitin, which there's an inference, so what is he excluding? What is he excluding? He's excluding Bechirus Evet. I don't understand. You don't have to explore it further.
Maybe he holds it's not just legit. In other words, he's putting legit in the Mishnah because we're dealing with the topic of legit.
Wait. You say, if you bring a get from Aku, you have to say Fanech Fanech. I say, bring get from get, you do not have to say Fanech Fanech. Is that sufficient? Do I have to say Legitin? What am I saying to Legitin? What am I saying? It's Erso Kegitin, Legitin. What am I adding by saying those words? Rabbi Yudan Nasi, when he recorded the Mishnah and he quotes words, there's nothing superfluous in the Mishnah. It's to infer something. What's to be inferred from that? For gittin, yes, but for selling a slave, not. That's considered chutz loretz. Therefore, the slave is emancipated. Tanu Rabbanon. B'shlosha drochim shovsa suri l'Eretz Yisrael, u'b'shlosha l'chutz loretz. within 3 contexts, we equate Surya to Eretz Yisrael, and the other 3, we could equate it to Eretz Yisrael, to Chutz La'aretz. Now, before we begin, on a Torah level, you leave Eretz Yisrael, you go into Chutz La'aretz. Are you contaminated? Rabbinically contaminated. Torahly, you're not contaminated. But if you go into Chutz La'aretz, there's a rabbinic contamination. Let's say you have Truma. You take Truma to Chutz La'aretz. You're not permitted to eat the Truma. The Truma becomes contaminated. Unless it was sealed in a receptacle which was insulated. But are you contaminated? You're contaminated. So if your Kohen goes to Chutz La'aretz and you go back into Eretz Yisrael now, you're not permitted to eat Truma. You have to undergo the purification process before you permitted the Truma. There's rabbinically. There's all rabbinical. There's rabbinic contamination. What's the rationale? Because, as I mentioned, the Gemara says in Zvochim, when they during the original conquest of Eretz Yisrael, they went and they actually cleansed the land. They dug up Eretz Yisrael till they reached virgin soil, to make sure there were no human remains anywhere from one end of Eretz Yisrael to the other. That's how they cleansed it from any human remains. Because since they were going to have to live in the context of Tara, Kochim and Truma and all these other things, they couldn't take a chance. There should be any human remains anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. Where they discarded it. They weren't Jewish. Whatever. No, they could have. Where did they bury people? They had cemeteries. So they were marked. They were marked locations. You had landfills. They had the same thing. I'm not talking about what's buried in the mountain. They didn't. No. It wasn't deep. It wasn't deep at all. The Gemara says, if you remember the Gemara, because I know you quote Mishnayos in the Gemaras very often. The Mishnah says in Klal Godel, it speaks about Choresh and Zoreah. So normally, how do you plow? You plow the earth, you seed, then you plow again. When it says Eretz Yisrael, because it's stone, it's a whole different. I understand. No, it's just the opposite. Just the opposite. They just do it once, because once you make the crevice in the ground, the seed goes in between. It doesn't come out. Where the earth is soft, the seed sits on top, so they have to again plow to turn it over again. The seed should be embedded in the earth. So when they bury in Eretz Yisrael, it's a shallow grave. The graves are much shallower, because you can't dig that deep, because it's rock. That's the reason.
Rather, don't we have a halacha that if a person walks in the public domain, he doesn't have to worry about
If it's a question.
It's only in the private domain.
Sofik Tumashus Arabim is Torah.
Right.
You're right.
So
Because it's true, but what happens factually if we come upon it? It's inevitable thing we're going to come upon problems. There are problems. That's if it's a Sofik. But what happens if it's determined that there were human remains there? So we have a problem. So to avoid all these problems, it's a clean zone. It's cleansed spiritually. It's cleansed. You cannot become contaminated. Human remains that have designated areas in Eretz Yisrael for burial. Okay. Wait a second. 1 second. I'm not getting off on. Okay. You download it. You find out. Now, it's interesting. There's the famous machlokes of Shimei Choy and the Chachomim. A non-Jew, does he contaminate ba'oil or not ba'oil? Now, what are the remains in there? So, not Jewish remains. They're not Jewish remains. So, if you're of the opinion that the remains of non-Jew doesn't contaminate ba'oil, so what is my concern? Maga maso. You may come in contact or carry it. Carry. But walking over, let's say it's deep in the ground, it's not a problem, right? Because there's going to be a discussion in the Gemara soon. If you go into Chutz La'aretz, Tevashidu Migdol, you go in a box, and you're insulated. Are you contaminated? Right? Are you contaminated or not? If you say that the earth is like human remains of a Jew, so then what? You have to go in a box, because even though the contamination rises, because you're insulated by the box, it doesn't affect you. But let's say you say, according to Shimei Choy, one doesn't even have to go in a box. Let's say a person goes and he puts his hand over, he's on the boundary line, Eretz Chutzlar, he puts his hand over Chutz La'aretz. Is he contaminated? He won't be contaminated. Why? Because it's only the earth itself. If you touch the earth, you move the earth. Because it can't be any better than the human remains. If it would be the goy himself, the body doesn't emit contamination. So therefore, it's magom maso. I mean, we're going to discuss this in the Gemara. We're talking about when they first came in. Chutzlar, no question. It's more than rov. It's more than rov.
Which way does Shimon identify?
He says it's mago kivri yakum emetamim. He's the one. Atem kriyim odom v'hem lo
Only
kriyim.
by contact.
Only contact or moving or carrying.
Okay. Otherwise, there's no...
But if you walk in a non-Jewish cemetery, you're not contaminated.
Is it how we rule today?
The Mechaber cites both opinions, and that's the whole idea of a Kohen going to a hospital.
That's what I thought.
It should be. It's discouraged, but if he has to go for whatever reason, let's say a person is going for a procedure which is not life-threatening, what you shouldn't go in for a procedure. So then you rely on the opinion that they do not. We rely on Rishon Michoy. They do not contaminate. So the presumption in the morgue, they're non-Jews, but in Eretz Yisrael it's not so simple. The vast majority are Jews, right? People who pass away in hospitals. So, but they build the hospital in a way that that area is really sectioned off. That even though it may be, it doesn't travel into the rest of the hospital. It's blocked. Well, ICU people don't necessarily die in the ICU. That's a suffix to Mishusai Rabbi. That's a suffix to Mishusai Rabbi. The morgue is definitely tumah.
So, Rabbi, yesterday I think it was that you described this concept of contamination with the shaving and the honey and the residual of the vessel and so forth. And you made a distinction between the Jew and the Gentile.
That's Rav Shimon That's Rav Shimon Yochai. He bases on a pasuk. No. That's according to Rav Shimon Yochai's understanding. The Gentile, although it doesn't have the same intensity, does it still generate too much oil? That's Rav Shimon Yochai said it does not. Chacham say it does, but that's based on a pasuk. It says Odom kiyomos ba'oil. Odom, said Rav Shimon, Odom is only the Jewish call. It's classified as Odom. So now, within that context, how do we understand it? So that the Orach Chaim HaKodesh offers his explanation. The Chacham say no, even the non-Jews called Odom. That means there's sufficient contamination, even though one may be more intense than the other, but in terms of oil, there's no difference between the Jew and the non-Jew.
So according to that view, there is no difference.
There is no difference. No difference. No difference. No difference. There it's maga. There it's maga. Right. There. Right. Correct. You touch the bone fragment itself. Of course you contaminate. That's coming in contact. No. Okay. So Afra Tomei Kechutz La'aretz. Syria, the earth of Syria. We're talking about specifically Aram Tzova and Aram Naraim, Aleppo, and that area. The earth is contaminated, no different than the earth from anywhere else outside of Eretz Yisrael. Hamocha Avdul Syria Kamocha V'chutz La'aretz. If you sell your slave to someone, the purchaser is in Syria. It's like you sold him to the purchaser being anywhere else outside of Eretz Yisrael, meaning you penalize it. The sale's not a valid sale. The slave is emancipated. Because kibush doesn't make a difference. But we'll see. Maybe get the Syria, maybe Chutz La'aretz. If you bring a get from Syria to Eretz Yisrael, it's like bringing it from overseas. Okay? Because again, we don't rule like Rameir. Even Rameir agrees to that. It's only Aku. Shlosh Eretz Yisrael. And regarding three laws, it's the same as Eretz Yisrael. Chayeves b'maiser, u'b'shviyas. Meaning, it has Kedushas Oretz. So you have to, it's a little contradictory. Here we're saying it contaminates like Chutz La'aretz, but yet, in regard to Trumas and Maisers, tithing the produce, it's like Eretz Yisrael. Regarding working the land, sabbatical year, Shviyas, it's Eretz Yisrael. Harotzli kones la b'tayro nichnas. So the question is, what we just finished saying, the Gemara is going to ask a contradiction. We just said that it's Afro is Tmeo, is Tomei Ke'achut, then it says, but if you want to enter there in your state of purity, you have a right. You're not going to become contaminated. But you just said Afra is Tomei. Is it contaminated or not? Vakone sode b'Surya. Person purchases a field in Surya. Gekone b'Parure Yerushalayim. It's like buying a field in the best quality location in Yerushalayim. Meaning it's encouraged. You should purchase. That's the value of purchasing a field in Surya. Meaning Jewish occupation is key and crucial over there. To drive out the non-Jews, the non-Jewish residents. This is like Yishuv, like you have Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, you have Yishuv Surya. Because since Surya is Eretz Yisrael, therefore we have to populate it with Jews. Could you sell to a Jew in Eretz Yisrael? The same thing. Well, we're going to see. The Gemara is going to say Kibush Yoch Nishmei Kibush. If David's personal conquest gave it the status of Eretz Yisrael, then you can't. You're not permitted to sell. That's the whole discussion, with Shemitah. They sell it to a non-Jew for the year, whatever it is. It's not so simple. You're not permitted to sell. You're not supposed to sell land in Eretz Yisrael to a goy, right? You have an apartment, and some non-Jew wants to buy an apartment. You can make endless profit on it. You're not permitted to sell it. Not permitted. Because you're not permitted to sell property in Eretz Yisrael to a non-Jew.
And David Melch's time is the cutoff?
Kibush?
Yeah.
No. We'll see. First of all, why, there's a question. His personal conquest, was it a conquest, was it not? The question, why is it a question? The answer is, we'll see. There's Rashi and there's Tosafos cites in Sifri. Firstly, when he conquered, all Eretz Yisrael was not yet conquered. So because he conquered it too early, if he would, all it would have been conquered. If you ever take the tour in Ir David, they give you, they show his palace. They tell you, they'll give you the whole historical background about the Yevusi. There was the ancient tribe Yevusi, a non-Jewish tribe. They were still right outside Yerushalayim. They weren't conquered yet. And David, so Hashem says, David, where are you going there? Why don't you take care of your backyard before you go to Syria? And that's the discussion why his personal conquest was not a valid conquest. That it should assume the status of Eretz Yisrael. That's kibush yochid, lo shmei kibush. Doesn't mean kibush yochid. A personal conquest, that's the Sifri. Rashi learns no, because it was a personal conquest. Because he did not do it on behalf of Klal Yisrael, he did it on behalf of himself. That was his personal conquest. Aram Tzova. Okay, we'll see in a moment. He valued it. He treated it as that. But the question is it or is it not? If you're of the opinion kibush yochid lo shmei kibush, a personal conquest is not, you can call it what you want, but it's not. Okay? Ksovar. We'll see. He was the king. He conquered it for himself.
Because he wasn't told, even though he wasn't told.
He wasn't told to conquer it.
Otherwise, to be a kibush, right, full-fledged kibush, you have to be told.
We'll see Rashi in a minute. Ksovar kibush yochid shmei kibush. If you're telling me that it's chayv b'maser or b'shviyus, it's evidently kibush yochid shmei kibush. That a personal conquest is a conquest. 1 second. So Rashi says, what's kibush yochid? The David shlo yikol Yisrael biyachad. Kederach shoy b'kibush Yoshua. Shoy kulam. When David conquered it, all Jews, it wasn't a national conquest that all Jews went to conquer. When Yeshua, all Jews entered Eretz to conquer the whole area. 1 second. The kavshua l'tzorach kol Yisrael. He says two things. The initial conquest, they were all there to conquer, and when they conquered, who did they conquer on whose behalf? L'tzorach kol Yisrael. That's for all Jews. Even though kodem chalukah, before it was divided, that parcel of land that was conquered belonged to Klal Yisrael. Avol David lo kovesh el l'tzorcho. It was just to accommodate his personal need. It had nothing to do with Klal Yisrael. But since he was a king, maybe his personal conquest takes on that special value. A commoner's conquest is not even a consideration. It's nothing.
So he took the Jewish army to just...
King could do whatever he wants. It's a pasuk in the Torah. A king could do whatever he wants. Of course, he meant l'shem shamayim, David. There's no question.
He could send troops into Africa to conquer...
Correct. It'd be the same question. Same thing. Okay.
So the land that looks like nothing, and you plant something in it.
Wait, let's see the Gemara. We'll see. So we're saying kibush yochid shmei kibush. Therefore, the produce that grows in Eretz Yisrael has to be tithed. It's subject to shmita, to shvius. So the Gemara says, "If rotzli konas b'tar nichmas," it says, therefore, if kibush yochid shmei kibush, if you're not in a state of contamination, you want to enter there in a state of purity, you retain your state of purity. So the Gemara says, but how do you retain? If we're saying going from Eretz Yisrael to Aram Tzov to Aleppo, you have to go through a location which is Afra Tomei. So how are you nichlas betaro? How do you enter into Syria in a pure state? V'amar Afra Tomei. You just finished saying that the earth of Chutz La'aretz, of Syria is Tomei. B'shida Teva Migdol. He enters in a box. He's insulated in a box. The Tanya, as learned in the Braiso, Hanichnas L'Eretz Amin B'shida Teva Migdol. Each one is a box. There's different shapes. Rebbe Metame, Rebbe Yosef Yehuda Metayer. Rebbe says if you enter in the box, even in the Chutz La'aretz, Eretz Amim, you're contaminated. Rebbe Yosef Yehuda is Metayer. Now let's stop for a moment. There's a discussion, a number of locations. The Torah says that if you have an oil means a tent, but it means a structure with a roof on it. The contamination is contained within the oil. Is contained within that structure. So let's say you have a building, you have a roof, and you're on the roof, and you have a corpse or remains of a human being. You have a funeral parlor, and you're on the roof. Are you contaminated? You're not contaminated. Because the oil contains whatever is contained within it. Doesn't have to have walls. Doesn't have to have walls. Doesn't have to have walls. If it's a tefach wide, and you have remains under that, and you're on top of that board, you will not be contaminated. As long as it's aligned with the board, so it doesn't go beyond the board. But let's say you have a roof, and you have a skylight in the roof, and the skylight's open, and you put your hand over that skylight. Since contamination rises, and there's nothing to contain it, you become contaminated. But if it's closed, it's sealed, you're not contaminated. Now, but what contains tumah? Oil contains tumah. What about if you have an oil zoruk? It's in movement. The oil is in movement. It's not stationary. There's the Machlokes Rebbe and Rebbe Yosef Yehuda. Oil zoruk shmei oil is not shmei oil. Let's say you have a box, and you have the remains of a human being in the box, and the box would actually is sufficient to be an oil. And you take the box, and you put it, and you throw it. You throw the box. It has the remains of a human being in it. Okay? And now this box, in flight, passes something, and there's something above it. Does that object, food, whatever, does it become contaminated? You'd say, well, it's in an oil. The remains are contained within an oil. But the oil is in movement. So that's a discussion. Oil in movement, does it contain or does it not contain? Rebbe says oil is only if it's stationary. If it's in movement, it doesn't contain, doesn't insulate. Rebbe Yosef says it's relevant. Whether it's in movement or not, it does not contaminate. So according to Rebbe, if you take it into Chutz La'aretz, in the box and there's movement, seemingly you should be contaminated, right? Because since it's in movement, an oil only contains if it's stationary. You're not stationary if you're being transported into Chutz La'aretz, into Eretz Amim. Right? That's what we're going to discuss in a moment. What's on top is not a problem.
No, it's a movement, but the Tamei object is also moving together with it. So
No, you're going over a cemetery. The earth is like a cemetery. If you brought it to a cemetery with a box, let's say in Eretz Yisrael, are you contaminated? According to Rebbe, you're contaminated. Right? Because the oil doesn't function as an oil if it's moving. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says you're not contaminated because you're insulated by the box. Okay? We pass all Zork. That's the whole discussion with an airplane. Right? You have a corpse is being brought there for burial. You have Kohanim on the plane. It's a problem. If you hold old Zork Lo Shmei oil, and the plane, when it's stationary, it's not a problem. But once it starts moving, and let's say the Kohen is on top of that box, it's in the cargo hold, so the contamination goes straight up. even though the cargo hold is contained within its own compartment, does make a difference. Okay, you work it out. Okay, you pay the ticket for the Kohen. Okay.
This just to make sure I understand. The setting here is you're contemplating a grave in the ground.
No, not a grave in the ground. We're not contemplating. Chazal said that Eretz Amim, any location outside Eretz, so the earth is the equivalent of the grave. Even a clump of earth, you go and you examine it, you won't find any remains in there. Rabbinically, we give it the status of what? As if it's the corpse itself.
Okay, but let's just contemplate that there is a body in that ground, a grave.
Let's look in the Eretz Yisrael. A person's taking the box over a cemetery in movement. Is it contaminated?
I thought it seals if there's air
No. If it's movement, you're in a coach. Person's in a sealed coach, and the coach goes through a cemetery. The passenger in the coach, is he contaminated or not contaminated? And the coach is a sealed coach. According to Rebbe, he's contaminated. Because since the coach is in movement, it does not insulate the person within the coach. Although it's an oil, but it's not a functioning oil. The moment it stops, let's say it stops, somebody puts the remains of human being underneath, and before it starts moving, they remove it.
no problem.
It's not a problem. The person, everybody agrees he's not contaminated. Not contaminated. Because the oil is stationary. Okay? So let's say,
So what's the concept? How does it, is it sukkim?
So, of course, the
what's
oil
logic? Is there a logic behind it?
oil that it contains is Gzer Sakosov. What is the conventional oil? Oil, it means a tent. It means a structure. A structure is always stationary. That's Rebbe's position. That's the way he interprets the Torah. Person who dies in a tent, right? Everything contained within the tent is contaminated. The inference, anything outside is not contaminated.
In the past, you've always described to think of a tumor like smoke.
Correct.
So it sort of rises and it finds its escape. And so, like you put your hand over the chimney, you're going to get the tumor.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
But if everything is sealed and you're on the outside, presumably you're protected.
Wait a second. Wait. But what has the sealant has to be what? It's only sealed if the Torah says oil is the sealant. If it's an oil, it's not an oil.
I'm walking on the roof of a house.
Because
It's sealed and there's a body inside.
you're not contaminated.
Protected.
By what? Because the structure is classified as oil. Oil contains contamination. The smoke cannot
Once
penetrate.
it's moving, that falls away.
Correct. So once it falls away, it may be covered. But whatever the sealant is, it's not sufficient to contain whatever's contained within it. Therefore, it penetrates it.
And this is learned by,
That's Rebbe.
I guess, it's a logic.
It's just,
What is oil?
what is oil? When the Torah says oil, what does oil mean? Anybody who reads the Parsha, oil means a structure, a stationary structure.
Although we say a sukkah functions on the back of a traveling camel or on the back of a
It doesn't,
ship.
because a sukkah is something
That
else.
is an oil.
No, but it's something else. The reason why sukkah has so many walls and schach does not be an oil.
But it is a structure. And we say
Doesn't make a
it's all
difference. We're not.
structure.
We're saying this is also structure. Rebbe agrees it's a structure, but it's not a structure which meets the criteria of oil, and therefore it doesn't contain contamination. Because Torah says only an oil contains contamination. Okay. So Rebbe says, "Anichnas le'erzam b'shida tevu migdol Rebbe mitami." Rebbe says the person in the box becomes contaminated. Rebbe Yosef Yehuda b'tayr. Now, Afilu Rebbe lo kamitami el be'eretz ha'amim, the gozer al gusha v'al avira. Now, there's an interesting tosis here. Now, when Chazal said that the earth contaminates, gusha means the clump of earth itself. The clump of earth, if you touch it, you move it, you contaminate it. You carry it, you contaminate it. But the question is, did they go to the extent that it exudes or tumah rises from it as a corpse? Did they give it that kind of status? The answer is yes. But that's only if it's located in Eretz Amin. If it's truly Eretz Amin, has no Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, they give it that status. So therefore, not even if you're on top of it, you contaminate it. So if you're of the opinion, oil zorok lo shmei oil, the oil's not an oil, you contaminate it, even though you're in the box. Al Surya al Gusha gozer al Aviru lo gozer. Surya They only legislated that the gush, if you come in contact or you carry it, you become contaminated. But they didn't give it the full classification as if it's the remains of a human being. Wait a second. As a result of that, tumah does not rise from it. So therefore, you don't need the old concept. You don't need it. It's only if you come in contact. If you don't come in contact with it, you're not contaminated. So if you're in a box and you're carried over it, so physical contact, you're not in contact with it. So you're not contaminated.
Before David counted Surya,
It was regular Eretz Amin.
and therefore it counted with what?
We'll see in a
Contaminated more or less?
Before, they did not legislate the laws of Tumas Amin in terms of David. This is post-David. This is post-David.
Otherwise it would have been improving it.
No, then they'd have to rescind its classification. They have to change its classification.
Like earlier, like a common could say bush is bush yes and Avir no. I mean, based on what? Based on what can they say that? In Surya, it's only on Dusha, not on Avir. Why? What's the? Because it has a semblance of what?
We'll see. We'll discuss it. To be continued.